Well, it is a privilege to be joined by Abby Davidson, who, I mean, you've got an interesting background, Abby, on a thought expert, a social expert. I mean, there's a lot of different things, even working for Gap, if I remember the information right. And so beg the first question of how did your journey and how you've evolved lead to this book, Love and Money?
Well, thank you so much, Corey. This is great to be here. And yes, it's been a winding road, not a straight shot, like many interesting journeys in life. So the book, Money and Love, is based on a course that I took 15 years ago when I was in business school. And my career has been at the intersection of the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. As you mentioned, I've worked in all three, in the area of social innovation, trying to leave the world a bit better through ways that haven't been tried before. And so I went to business school because I had spent time in the nonprofit and public sectors, and I was looking to take some of those ideas and get more of a corporate experience so that I could be an effective communicator across all three sectors, an effective partnership broker. And so I found myself at Stanford Business School and ended up meeting someone there who I then started dating. And we had been dating about a year when we took this course with a labor economist. She was the first female faculty member hired by Stanford back in the 70s. Okay. And she pioneered this course. It was called Work and Family. And it was about all the big decisions that you would need to make in life as someone intending to combine work and family, money and love. And it was full of data. She's a labor economist by training. So lots of data, lots of guest speakers. And my husband and I were taking this class at a time where spoiler alert, he then became my husband.
Oh, okay. To jump ahead, yes.
Ahead, yes. So this man I was dating for a year, I was taking this class with him at a time when we needed to decide, do we look for jobs in the same city? Do we end up living together? Are we on this path towards a marriage, a deeper relationship? And it was really intimidating to have these conversations after only dating for a year. But because of the encouragement of the class and my professor, who became my co-author, we were able to have some really fundamentally important conversations all about money and love and what was important to us. And did we want kids, and what religion did we want them to be raised in? And, big topics. And so, fast forward 15 years, we have gone back as guest speakers in that class. We've both been climbing the respective ladders in our fields. I was at the Gap, as you mentioned, corporate for about a decade. And the further I got out from the class, the more that I realized that it really profoundly changed my life. And the approach that we took in the class was one that everyone should have access to, not just the people who had the privilege and opportunity to be in the class. And so I wrote the book with my co-author in order to do just that, to give more people a framework for making the biggest decisions of their lives so that they would have more confidence, feel more empowered, and find more meaning and purpose in their life.
And that's so good because, you're touching on some of the big ones that we have to make decisions about, right? That there's aspects of life, in relationship or not, but they're particularly troublesome and insidious at times when you're talking about adding a marital context to it or a relationship context to it, because I could have a certain way I want to do things, which is not the way my wife wants to do them. Shocking, I know. But it's recognizing that, okay, that makes it even all the more important that we figure out, how do we navigate these things? What are the best ideas, the best frameworks like you're describing? And then also, what are the ways not to do it? And so, you're teeing it up perfectly. Walk me through, because I've gone through the book and already know the answer to this question, but the people that are listening to this maybe don't yet. So walk me through what are some of these frameworks?
So our big framework, which is designed to be flexible, so you can apply it to any life decision, big or frankly even small, but sturdy, so it actually is the same shape, if you will, across all those decisions, is called the 5 C's. And I'll run through them, and then we can go deeper on any of the C's that you think your listeners would be interested in hearing more about. So it starts with clarify what is important to you. Second C is communicate. As you mentioned, you're not making these decisions most likely in isolation. So it's very important that you talk to anyone affected by the decision. If you're in a marriage, that will be your spouse, your partner. The third is to consider a broad range of choices. The fourth is to check in with friends, family, and trusted resources. And the fifth C is to explore the likely consequences of your decision.
Okay. And so let's kind of take it one by one with the idea of clarify, because some of this I love because you're putting together some building blocks of things that when you hear it, I remember when I came across it's like, well, duh, it's like, okay, those are those things that they're right in front of our face, but we never kind of synthesize it to this kind of degree. And so when you're talking about clarify, what are you meaning?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we've heard from the folks who have tested out the framework. And I should say my co-author and I have personally road tested this over a number of years and applied it to our own life decisions. But the feedback we've gotten is that, yes, it's not rocket science. This isn't like a magic silver bullet or a bolt of lightning that's going to automatically make you make the right decision, but it does give you more confidence in your approach and therefore more self-assurance as you move through life. So when we say clarify, it's really important to think about the things that are most important to you. And that, again, it sounds kind of logical, right? Yeah, think about what's most important. But the truth is that we are so influenced by what we might have been raised to think is most important, or what society tells us we should care about. So it's really not that easy to untangle our own personal values and wants and desires from that of important influences to us. So when we say clarify what's most important to you, it is really to you and not to your parents or your teacher who had a big influence on you. So a lot of times that could look like doing an exercise to understand your own personal values. There's lots of them online that people can access. It could also look at paying attention to what gets you really fired up. If you read an article in a paper or online and you're like, that's not fair, or that's terrible, that is touching on an important value. And so that's information.
Something's triggered in that. Right.
Exactly.
Something that's meaning and foundational to you. Is triggering that, because I hear the word clarify and I immediately jump to the terminology I use, which is the meanings. Right? What's the meaning I've attached to whatever the things is? Because one of the truisms I have in married life is we don't fight about things, we fight about the meanings attached to the things.
Totally.
And so clarifying is you're describing what's underneath it, because it's not just let's save. Well, saving means something. And I want to reach this certain amount because that means something. And you're describing, if you can open that up, I think that fits right into one of the other C's, which is the choices, right? Because maybe if I've clarified some stuff, I realize, wait, I'm not as locked in on a narrow path that I have to have it this way. I actually have a few more variety of ways I can go because my clarification helped widen the scope.
Absolutely. And I think you made such a good point that often when we think about our budgets and our money, it is an expression of our values. It is a way that we say, hey, this is actually important to me to spend. And even though I might be a saver, I think it's okay to have a craft beer with my partner every week. Or I think, I love being out in nature with my family. So I'm going to make sure we have really good rain gear. So if you're in the rainy season, we're still able to go outside. So those sorts of things are telling, and they're very connected. And to your point about choices, we get very kind of locked in to almost tunnel vision, kind of the binary choices especially when we're facing a big life decision. So as often people think about, well, should I marry this person or break up with them? Right? Those are very extremes. There might be
those are big ones. Yes.
Yeah, there might be a whole host of options in between. Or same thing with, should I take this job or should I go for the promotion or should I quit my job? Right. I mean, those are, again, like pretty extreme paths within.
Right. Should we have another child or are we done? Or should we have a child at all? I mean, all of those are big things we're describing.
Right. And so, to the point of generating additional choices, it can be helpful to try to think about what you might be missing when you're just locked into those binary choices. So are there some options in between? And I'll give you an example. In the height of the pandemic, my husband and I have 2 young kids, and they were both on Zoom school for a very long time. And we were feeling really tight in our small footprint home. And we felt like, if we had more space, I think everyone felt this way, but we felt if we had more space, everything would be easier. And, we would all not be on top of each other. We'd all get along. And so, the idea is, well, do we move to a completely different city and get more space? And it turned, we kind of chased down some of our information and ran the numbers, and it turns out that it didn't actually make financial sense for us to do that based on, again, what we clarified as our long-term goals. But one of the things that was became clear in that process is that I did need more space for my office. I was working out of my kids' bedroom with their bunk bed behind me and Lego pieces on the floor, and that was not conducive to creative work. And so I ended up renting a separate office space. So I'm talking to you today from, a different space. It wasn't initially something I thought about as a choice, right? But when you take the time to think about all the different places in between stay in our house and move, finding creative ways to expand the space that we have at our, to use was another option that we ended up working out.
Oh, that's so good. What came to my mind when we were talking about this right before was something that's much less on the high on the scale of. I'm married to a woman, Pam, that she is the one that from just some of the things she loves doing is the thrift store shopping, the bargain shopping, hey, I'm going to get that on sale. I had the clearance racks right off. Just that's kind of who she is and for sure who she was. And one of the things we recognized is she would always come home with bargain shoes early in our marriage. And then they looked cute and they were cheap. They were inexpensive at least because they were on sale. Well, there's a reason they were inexpensive. Also, is because they're not as comfortable maybe over the long day. And so she'd come home and her feet would hurt. Well, her grandmother had a saying of spoil your feet because that matters, which usually then means you're going to be spending much more than you would on a sale pair of shoes. And so that actually came true just the other night. She bought a new pair of shoes and we're out walking and she's like, I absolutely love these things. And they're a whole lot more than I wanted to spend, and I already knew where she was going. Spoil your feet, which that's a different clarification of who she was than where she is now, of recognizing there's a different meaning attached to, well, it's a cute pair of shoes versus, no, these actually serve a purpose. They'll last longer. So in the long run, she's an accountant. So she already probably ran the numbers too. I can get this many more years out of it and I'll end up, it was cheaper than buying the cheap pair anyway. And, but it's just, all of that is kind of what you're describing with some of these C's. It's just when I can clarify it and I can get to the deeper components, I get a chance to realize some different choices, which are fit better with where I am, what I want to be, what's better for me in that situation.
Absolutely. And that example, it kind of brings up the last C, which is consequences. So, going with the shoe example, because I also believe in fewer, better things, right? And so you might spend...
You and I both. Yep. You and I both. Own some things, but make them good things. Yes.
That's right. You might spend more on an item than you would, if you bought the cheap option. But the consequence of buying, 5 pairs of shoes at $20 each is that they're not going to last you very long. So the short term, yes, you're spending less, but you're going to have to buy 5 of them over the course of a year or whatever. And if you just invested in a pair of shoes that were maybe a little bit more expensive, let's call it $150, that's going to last you 5+ years, right? And so if you think about consequences, we're so wired as humans to focus on the short term, to think about what's right in front of us. But if you force yourself to kind of think about the short term as, let's say the next 0 to 6 months, then the medium term, 6 months to say 2 years, and long term, say 2+ years, you'll realize that the impact of your decisions might look very different over the medium and long-term horizons. And so by giving yourself an exercise, and we have exercises at the end of every chapter in the book, it helps trick your brain away from some of these biases that we have as humans to think about consequences in a different way.
Yeah, that's the thing that jumped out to me when going through this was how much our family of origin is just such an ingrained, this is just the way you do things. This is just the way you're supposed to do things. This is the right way to do things, rather than, now there's no morality we're actually talking about. These aren't moral things, shoes. There's no, even a larger house or an office, there's no morality structure here really. It's just what fits my circumstance best, what fits with the path and the journey we've got best. And so then you're just talking about what's comfortable. I think that's largely why we have these traditions, right? Of a family of origin, because it's what I've known. That, I love the classic story, and I heard this from a client, so I don't know if she was giving me the classic preacher story, which means it didn't actually happen in her family, but it seems like it's fun. It's more fun to tell it in the first person. But she always made a roast and cut the ends off of the roast before putting it in the pan to cook. And then one day her husband's, "Why do you do that?" And she said, "I don't know." So she called her mom. And her mom said, "Well, I don't know. Grandma would do that." So, all right. So, fortunately, Grandma was still alive. So, called Grandma. "Grandma, why do you cut the ends off the roast?" "Because it wouldn't fit in the pan otherwise." And so it became a tradition of how the family cooked a roast, because 2-3 generations prior, it wouldn't fit in the pan. And now all of a sudden it became the way you're supposed to cook a roast. And that's such a classic example of, we just do things so robotically at times that we never actually take the chance to break things down like the 5 C's to really make a better informed decision.
It's so true. I mean, our family of origin is what we know. It's what's familiar, what we see when we're growing up. And, the saying is, you can't be what you can't see is so true. And so one of the things that is so important is the check-in step. And I love that we're talking about these out of order, because this is not a linear process. This is kind of very iterative. So it's actually perfect, because you'll go back around, just as you might have to clarify something once and then re-clarify it. The check-in step can be very helpful to broaden your, set of influences and set of role models. And so it can be both with people, and it can be with published studies. And so it's interesting. In the example that I was sharing about looking for a new house, I had this hypothesis. My husband and I thought that if we had more space, we would all be happier, we would get along better. But actually, when I was doing the research for the book, I came across a published study that talked about, it found that actually the number of square feet of a home is not actually a predictor of how well a family gets along. You would think that, okay, you have more and more and more space, and therefore everyone gets along better if they're not all sharing one bathroom, or, well, you might want more than one bathroom in order to get along. But, especially with families with boys, which I have 2 young boys, it can actually, more space actually can make the family feel less connected and less kind of harmonious. And so that was a really interesting resource when I did the check-in, because I grew up in a big house in the suburbs, and we live in the city, and it's a much smaller home. And it was really helpful for me to see that published study to say, hey, it's not all about getting the big house in the suburbs so that, I can raise my kids exactly the way that I was raised. It's about understanding the research that's out there, what's important to us, again, and making some choices based on what we care about, not just, again, what we're wired to be familiar with.
And Abby, I love that idea of the check-in, particularly with the nuance like you're describing here of it's not just going to your normal everyday yes man or woman group of people that are just there to support you, not necessarily confront you. Right? Those are the fun friends to go out and have dinner with, but they're not the ones you bounce all your ideas off of, because they may not give you any pushback when you're way out off the deep end. Right. So you're describing the importance of the variety of seeking out what are some things I don't know about this subject? Because I believe we all got blind spots like you're describing of, well, my view, that's the world we live in, particularly with the connected social media company world. It's echo chambers, that if you just stay in one, you just see, because of algorithms, that one, you never get the other side unless you're intentional about that. And so I love the component of, I need to seek some feedback, but from a variety of sources, not just from a couple.
It's true. And it really depends on the type of decision that you're confronting, because there are some decisions where it is helpful to hear from a wide variety. So take the example of someone who might have paused their career to raise a family. And then they're ready to go back into the workplace. And it is very helpful. There's lots of research showing that the more people you tell, and the more, we call them weak ties. It's not our inner circle, but it's, their circles and their, sisters, neighbors, dog walker circle. They can be very helpful because they surface potential leads to us that we might not already know about. So that might be a situation where you actually do want to check in with as many people as possible and tell them what you're interested in doing and hear their thoughts. The decision to have a child or to have another child, on the other hand, might not be one that you want to talk with everyone about. Everyone's going to have very strong opinions. Often people want to justify their own choices. And so that might be one. We talked to a survey respondent. We did a survey as part of our research, and this person said, I intentionally only talked to a very few people about that very personal decision because I didn't want to be influenced by everyone's opinion. It wasn't until later, when I knew what I wanted, that I then wanted to reach out. So it can really depend how far you want to take the number of check-ins.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, I hear all of this as recognizing that I'm not alone in helping figure out things. That I have resources, I have people, and I just need to be wise about that on the hierarchy of whatever it might be. Right? That there could be something that is a much more personal thing that, like you're describing, they're just justifying or projecting their component of it, not actually in your corner. It's about them in that instance. But then there's other elements where, like, sometimes that's good to hear because you have maybe never even thought about it. And so I think it's good to just include that step. I mean, I'm loving that step just because it's important, because we're more informed then, which just empowers me all the more to make the choice, to make the decision and move forward.
Absolutely. And we do often feel very lonely when we're grappling with big decisions. And so, to your point, talking to people who have faced these types of decisions and moved through them, and anything that you can do to feel less alone and to feel more in control, putting yourself in the driver's seat of your own destiny is so important.
That's good. So, Abby, how can anybody that's heard this thus far, how can they find more and the book and just what it is you're up to? How can they find you?
We have a website for the book. It's moneylovebook.com. So that's the best place to go. And they can also find me on social media. I'm at abby.davison on Instagram and at Abby Davison on Twitter. Okay,
perfect. Well, Abby, thank you so much. And all the best on the book and its impact of getting that framework out there, because, man, if we can empower people to help feel better about the decisions they need to make and a roadmap therein, I think everybody gets better. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. I absolutely agree.